welcome to Griot Connects podcast. And we're here today to do our bedside books episode. And this is where we talk about all that cool stuff that we are reading that's stacked up
high
on the nightstand.
Yeah. Or it actually is the nightstand.
Is the nightstand at some point, right? Yeah, so we're going to share with you the books that we love, why we love them, and just kind of hope that you love them too. So I'm just going to jump right in, Tina, and, see what we've got today. The book that I selected actually for today, I've got 3 of them.
All right.
That I'd like to talk about. So let's roll in. The first one is called The Black Box. Mm-hmm. It's by Henry Louis Gates, and we all know Henry Louis Gates.
Yes, we do.
Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Mr. Smarty Pants himself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we all know he's a Harvard professor. He is the gentleman that has done the roots and, finding your roots and helping us all know where we originated and all of that good stuff, and a high proponent of ancestry research and such. Well, he's also a prolific writer, by the way.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this book immensely, and I am recommending it because it's my sense that this book is also representative of why I wanted to do the podcast from the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, let me tell you about it. So for me, the podcast is about amplifying Black voices, the authors, the writers, those who are taking their ideas and their imagination and their perspective, and they're putting it on paper. Mm-hmm. And in this book, what he talks about is how that has happened historically since the enslaved were brought to this continent.
Right.
And what they have done to own that narrative, to construct that narrative, and how the narrative is different from one writer to the next. Mm-hmm. And he just tries to help us understand how that happens. And so let me just tell you, he starts off by explaining this black box concept, meaning that when we are self-identifying, whether it be a job application, a mortgage application, any way that we have to tell the world who we are, we have to check a box.
Okay.
That's what society has defined.
Okay.
And so we have to tell the world that we live in a certain box. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, because we are checking that box, we don't always get to tell the story because of who you are in that box. We're not always telling our own story.
Well, history is generally the victors telling the story.
Yeah, to the victors go the spoil, right? And so in that concept, I get that. But what he's basically saying is this. People like W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, they took their perspectives and put it on paper. And by doing so, it introduced a narrative where we could look at ourselves from our own voice, from our own perspective. And that was kind of how it started out. We are able to tell our own stories. I use the example, if the 2 of us went to an event, we go to a concert, for example. We go to that concert, we partying, rocking it out, and we come home and we tell the story about the concert.
Right.
It's not going to be the exact same description.
No, it's not, because we're 2 different people.
Hello. That's all he's getting at, is that individuals dictate the perspective, and the perspective dictates what lands on that paper. Okay. And I love that simply because, and let me tell you why I love that. That's why we're bringing all these different voices to Griot Connects, is so that you hear a diverse story. You don't hear just one story. You hear from historians and mystery writers and romance novels and fiction story writers and so forth. And all of their voices collectively begin to form a complete community, a persona for a complete community. And so I love that about Griot Connects. I think that's what we are here to do.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're here to do.
In this book, one of the things that he approaches that I think makes it unique and a must read. Who must read this book? Let me tell you. The people who should read this book include leaders, organizers, people who are community activists, people who are interested in collaborations, and of course, people like us who are interested in amplifying that Black voice. And what this book, I think, offers that is unique and interesting is that it explores the diversity of voices within our community.
You mean we're not a monolith?
Hello, we're not a monolith.
Yeah. Well.
That SAT word that you use.
Oh, come on, man. You know what a monolith is.
Yeah, I kind of know what a monolith is, but tell the people what a monolith is.
A monolith is basically, a group of the same people who think the same things about the same stuff.
Right. And that
we
is
are not that.
us. And in fact, no one is. That's his point. And so we should not expect that the person sitting next to us has the exact same opinion as us. They're not gonna. They're just not gonna. But the question becomes then, and what he addresses beautifully in this book is, what do you do with that? Like, what do you do when you have common goals, but you have different opinions? You see where I'm at?
Therein lies the rub.
Therein lies the rub. And he approaches it very he's a professor, so he approaches it from a scholastical approach, research, scientifically, socially, and ultimately allows us to see that we can have diverse views and opinions and approaches.
And a common goal.
And a common goal. So I will tell you, that is why I really, really loved this book, and that's why I'm just going to recommend it to be on your nightstand.
It's going to be there.
It needs to be a bedside book. Okay. So there's one more thing, though, in that story that I want to tell you about that I thought was, I don't know, maybe even as powerful as the other points. I'll let you be the judge of that. And it has to do with the fact, because he's a historian, he really takes us from early slave days all the way through to the civil rights movement, talking about what we talked about, the voices and the things that we thought were important to say. Let me give you an example. So early on, the slave narratives, for example, they were literally just talking about their life and their experience and how hard it was and the gruesomeness, right, of their experience and dreaming for better days, right? So it was really all about a story of the life and the lifestyles. They had no concepts of what was going on in the political structure, the social structure, right? The economic conditions that they were living. They didn't understand those dynamics, so they didn't write about it.
Right.
However, after Reconstruction, you see people like Ida B. Wells coming on board and others who started talking about what they were seeing, what they were experiencing. And of course, it was a different narrative than what was being printed in the New York Times.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I enjoyed about it, is really realizing that these people were going against the norm by establishing newspapers. They started local flyers and bulletins before there were newspapers. They tried to find ways to capture what was happening in their little communities. They began to understand that they could multiply their voice and amplify it through writing. So, and through the distribution of their work. So therein came, again, these flyers that would go out that eventually became
the newspapers,
local newspapers and such. And Oh, by the way, as I began to understand how those stories were formed and how they were captured and how they were told, it really made me realize that these were grassroots efforts for people to simply connect with one another. And because they had been
so isolated.
Isolated.
Right.
Right?
And they didn't have any control.
No control. And so I'll give you an example. There might have been, if we kind of fast forward through the early 20s and 30s, where there was a lot of brutality that was happening, as we know, with Reconstruction and Jim Crow laws. And out of that came what do we call when a crowd just go grab folks and kill them? Lynchings, lynchings, all
massacres.
of that. Yeah, so people taking things into their own hands, basically, right? Mm-hmm. And so that era was going along. Mind you, women wasn't voting, right? Women didn't really have a voice, right? So a person like an Ida B. Wells or others who were writing, oh gosh, my brain is frozen, but who were writing their stories and writing about what was happening in their communities, it was extremely novel. It was very new. Mm-hmm. And it was very courageous because it was very dangerous.
Right.
So I am just completely impressed that not only did they take it upon themselves to write these stories, to document and chronicle their own lives and their own history, that these are the things that formed social opinion. And this is where I want to land, and I'm going to close it here. The reason that I love doing this podcast is that we have an opportunity to shape
social opinion.
Hello.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. It's the same thing. We have to keep telling our story with our voice. It's not like it's right or wrong. It's just yours.
And your own perspective.
And your own perspective. I would not want anyone standing up in court or before anyone explaining something on my behalf. I need to have my own voice. Because they gonna miss them.
Yeah.
Or represented in a way that I would not have. And so the value that I think in what Dr. Henry Louis Gates brings us in the Black Box is that he affirms and validates the power and the need to write historically, to write about our life experiences, to write about what we're seeing, what we're hearing out there in the world.
In this space and time.
In this space and time.
In our space and time.
In our space and time. To chronicle that in a way that is our own. And that's why I love this book.
All right.
You gonna read it, girl?
You know I'm gonna read it.
I want you to read this book.
I'm gonna read it.
Okay.